Welcome to the China Market webinar, part of the partnership in European Tourism Project and the 2018 EU-China Tourism Year. This European Commission project is delivered by ETOA, the European Tourism Association, the European Travel Commission, and the ACTA. My name is Mandy Guo from China Holidays. Let's introduce our contributors today. Mr. Thomas Larsen from Career Future, Mr. Ban Hui from UKC Company, Ms. Katherine OGrady Powers from Glenking Sheep Farm, Mr. Bar Horston from Horston International, Mr. Jacopo Avogado from Arms 23. I'm going to run through some housekeeping information. If you encounter any technical issues, please use the chat function. We have a team ready to respond to any issues. And also submit any questions through the program. We will answer them at the end. If we don't have the time, you will get feedback following by the email. And last, we will launch the few polls through the program. Also, you will be sent a brief survey at the end of the broadcasting. Please do submit your feedback and to ensure we can continue to provide. Let me go through today's agenda first. I would like to introduce today's moderator, Chairman of the China-Britain Travel Group, Mr. Gary Fletcher. Then we will listen to some new research, followed by the case study. The last session would be a Q&A. Let's hand on to Gary Fletcher.
Thank you, Mandy, for that introduction. And good afternoon to everybody. I'm Gary Fletcher, Group Chairman of China-Britain Travel Group, and we have been bringing Chinese to the UK and Europe for the last 20 years. So I'd like to start by giving a brief overview of the market as I have seen it develop over the last 20 years and bring us right up to date to what we are seeing now, the type of visitor that is coming to Europe from China. 20 years ago, as I think most of us know, it was the main cities. It was a predominance looking for the historic, the iconic features in each of the European countries. But now many of our visitors from China are coming maybe for the second, third, and even fourth time. Obviously, they are now looking for different attractions, different experiences, maybe more adventure as well, rather than being brought to Europe in large groups. They're certainly coming into Europe in smaller groups. FIT is becoming maybe not quite a majority of the market, but certainly growing, maybe 30% of the market. And I think we will hear some figures later in the webinar discussing the level and the type of visitors that are coming. So 20 years ago, it was very much large groups, ADS groups, of course, and now we are moving much more into the business delegations are being much more focused on what they want to see when they come to Europe. The FIT are much more family groups, so there will be the grandparents, the parents and the child will come in. Quite often the parents have already been to the UK or Europe in a business capacity, and now they want to come for leisure. So the market is changing. We've got to change with it, and the interest that has been generated in the last 2 or 3 years with the way that the Chinese are interacting with Europe and Europe attractions through WeChat and the social media has totally transformed our market. So I think now's the time to move on to introduce our first speaker, Thomas from Kairos Futures, and he's going to talk to us about the research that he's done into the Chinese market. And over to you, Thomas.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good evening to everyone who is joining from China. My name is Thomas Larsen. I am the General Manager of the China office of Kairos Future, which is an international insight and foresight company. And I've been living in China on and off since 2002. I will present some brief insights from a snapshot reports on the Chinese travel market that we have put together on behalf of the European Travel Commission, based on secondary research. An important driver behind the growth in outbound travel in China is the growing spending power among Chinese consumers, which is mainly a result of rising income levels. The average income in China grew by about 50% between 2011 and 2016. And during the same period, the yuan also strengthened the Chinese currency by 23% against the euro, which further strengthened the spending power for Chinese travelers to Europe. More recently, the currency has begun to get a bit weaker again against the euro, but still since 2011, it's up about 15%, so still much stronger than it was 5-6 years ago. On top of these trends, Chinese consumers are also spending a larger share of their disposable income on experience consumption, including tourism. What's happening right now, with some implications for tourism, is that people are spending more on immersive rather than observatory experiences. Things like participatory theater, which has become a big thing here in Shanghai. And when traveling to Europe, they want to not only see the street culture, for example, they want to become part of the European cafe culture or whatever it might be. The average traveler to Europe has an income about 6 times as high as that of the average Chinese consumer, which means that the income distribution is more important than the average income when you try to make forecasts about travel to Europe. As you can see here in the top right chart, the income distribution curve is actually an overlay of 2 separate bell curves, one of them representing rural consumers and the other one representing urban consumers. And what's expected to happen in the next 10 years is that the sharp part of this urban income curve and the peak of the curve will pass the point where travel to Europe becomes feasible. So this will lead to a sharp growth in the number of Chinese travelers to Europe, according to a study by Goldman Sachs, a doubling by 2025. The bottom right map shows the geographical distribution of income with rich coastal regions and poorer inland areas. What's hidden in this map, but very important, is that there are wealthy inland cities, for example Chengdu in Sichuan province, which have a strong tourism demand as well. In an international perspective, the size of the Chinese travel market has surpassed that of other markets. Here we see it through outbound tourism expenditure. The World Bank recently adjusted its numbers for 2010 to 2015, which makes the picture even more dramatic than what was previously known. China's spending is now twice as high as that of the US market, just 2 years after overtaking the US market. So this has gone really, really fast. The summer is the most popular season for travel, according to data from the Chinese Chinese Tourism Academy, despite relatively short paid leaves. On a weekly basis, the peaks are around the Chinese New Year in January, February, and the National Day holiday in October. But on a monthly level, the summer months are the strongest months. Again, according to data from the Chinese Tourism Academy, Europe is the destination for about 12% of the outbound trips, and that's when excluding the trips to Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. Most of the outbound trips are with family or friends. Only 6% of Chinese outbound travelers travel alone. One striking thing about Chinese travelers is that they are on average very young. 2/3 are born in the 1980s or 90s. And for online travel bookings, this number is 80%. So 80% of the bookings online are made by people born in the 80s or later. This is according to Fliggy, one of the major online travel platforms. Per trip spending is quite high considering the income levels that we saw on the previous slide. More than 1/5 of outbound travelers spend more than 2,500 euros per person per trip. And this includes short-haul trips as well. So even higher if we look at travel to Europe. Specific travel categories that have increased rapidly in the last year, these are year-on-year numbers, include personalized trips, car rentals, and local guides. So these numbers indicate that the interest in independent and individualized travel has probably grown faster than the comfort level in planning such trips. So travelers need help with the trip planning and finding local guides. It also shows that Chinese are attracted to the freedom of being able to drive at the destination, easily being able to get around. A few things to highlight about the regulatory environment and the government's involvement in the travel trade in China. The outbound travel market in China is highly regulated. For example, foreign-owned travel agencies need to sell to Chinese consumers either through online channels from overseas or through Chinese partners. In a few cases, that could be a joint venture partner, but usually through intermediaries. There are several initiatives in the current 5-year plan to promote domestic tourism, including the establishment of leisure belts around major Chinese cities. But some of these measures also spill over into the outbound travel market. For example, more than 260 new airports are to be constructed until 2020, and many of these airports are international, so increasing the access to the international market or to international destinations. The 5-year plan also seeks to strengthen tourism cooperation with countries along the so-called Belt and Road, which is a signature initiative of the current Chinese leadership to promote trade, development, and cooperation between China and more than 60 countries, mostly in Asia, but also in Eastern Europe. So, for example, a visa-free arrangement has been implemented for Chinese tourists to Serbia, and that happened very recently this year, and similar discussions are ongoing with several other European countries. There have been several measures to shift travel away from the national holidays, previously through more paid leave days, but more recently to promote the enforcement of the paid leave system, because a problem has been that a lot of people are not using their paid leave. A few changes to highlight with regards to the Chinese travel trade. As elsewhere, there has been a strong shift towards the online part of the travel trade in China, which is usually divided into the OTAs, the online travel agencies, and then the user-generated content platforms with reviews and so on. But in China, this distinction is becoming more and more blurred because everyone is moving towards becoming OTAs, also the meta search engines. So the landscape is starting to look quite messy with a lot of different actors coming from different directions, but trying to do kind of the same thing. But behind the scenes, it's actually quite. Most of these platforms are controlled by a very small number of internet powerhouses. A few international platforms are present either under their own brands in China or through collaboration with Chinese OTAs. But in general, the Chinese OTAs need to be part of the equation when targeting Chinese travelers, unless perhaps you're looking for the people that consciously try to avoid other Chinese tourists during their trips. They like to use non-Chinese OTAs. Overall, Chinese OTAs have a stronger offline components than many Western OTAs, with strong phone support and even physical help centers in some popular destinations. They're also branching out in all kinds of directions. Tunar and Ctrip, two of the major OTAs, have or are going into aviation and cruises, and trying to build an ecosystem of services around Chinese tourists. Despite the growth of the online travel ecosystem, we should not forget that a large share of bookings are still done through traditional agencies. This number here is a few years old, 80% of bookings, but even if it has gone down slightly, the majority of trips are booked in this way. So, and this is a landscape that is quite fragmented, around 4,000 companies in this space. Some of them quite innovative, providing things like VR experiences for prospective travelers, so that you can see and experience what a trip will be like before making the purchase decision. I won't go into all of the recommendations in details, but just a few highlights. Key obstacles include the difficulty of getting sufficient buy-in from the Chinese partner, which requires a long-term perspective and a lot of patience. These are advice coming from European tour operators and tourism product providers that have been working for a long time with the Chinese market. The dominant Chinese OTAs have a huge bargaining power and are known for applying a low-cost strategy. This might not be a problem if you have a business model with post-booking revenue stream, but otherwise it might be painful because it really cuts into the margins. The growing demand for personalized and specialized travel experiences offers some opportunities on the product side. There are many growing niche markets and a growing interest in themed travel, for example, sports and outdoor adventures. The build-up for the Beijing Winter Olympics to 2022 will provide some opportunities for promoting winter sports destinations and products. Individual travel is still outside the comfort zone of many Chinese travelers, even if they want to travel independently. So this provides opportunities to help them create tailored plans in the booking stage, and also to help them get immersed and exposed to the right experiences at the destination. Authenticity does not include, for Chinese travelers, to give up the conveniences from home. And one of the most important conveniences is to be plugged into their social media channels, which means they need access to Wi-Fi. Marketing can be done on different levels. Even with a small budget, you can make sure that your website works well in China, and that it can be found through Chinese search engines, and perhaps getting a profile on Baidu. Usually this takes more than just translating the website into Chinese. You need to make sure that the loading times are fast and that it works through mobile devices, because Chinese use mobile devices a lot. But it's worth remembering that 20% or so of Chinese outbound travelers prefer to book directly through the product providers' websites. And in some categories, that number is even higher. So it's worth investing in this. You can also market through Chinese people living at your destination. You don't have to find the expensive key opinion leaders in China. There's usually someone with more followers than the entire population of the city that they live in Europe, but with a lot of followers back in China. Also make it attractive for Chinese visitors to take photos and to share them in their social networks. So to take photos while they're traveling. There's also increasing use of new technologies like small selfie drones that you can bring in your luggage, and 360 degree cameras that so you can take photos in all directions, and you can upload that then to your microblog, for example. In terms of cooperation, work with OTAs for targeting consumers on a large scale, and team up with smaller agencies for niche products and audiences. So with that, I say thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. That was really most interesting and certainly has set the scene for our webinar. Now I'd like to introduce Ben of UKC Company, and particularly I want to ask him to explain how he sees the cultural differences that the Chinese visitor is looking for when they come to Europe to see, and whether they want to see that the main differences, or whether they want to see that, to be honest, we're all the same across the whole world. Anyway, the very first question that I'm going to ask you, Ben, is what do you think are the main cultural differences between our two countries, our two areas, that's Europe and China?
Right, cultural differences. In general, Chinese tourists, like tourists from anywhere else in the world, when they're traveling, they just want to have a good time. However, if I have to point out a few cultural differences, it would be perhaps on their way they communicate and perhaps their body language as well. For example, Chinese tourists tend to talk very fast and very loudly when they're excited about something. This doesn't mean that they're rude at all, perhaps it's just a different way of expression. If you are a tour guide and a group of Chinese tourists standing very, very close to you, again, they're not trying to invade your personal space, but rather the concept of personal space is quite different culturally. And finally, I'd just like to give you an example in the language itself. Some Chinese people, when they are traveling, they just tend to translate whatever they have, into very simple English. So when you hear something like, give me this, go there, this doesn't mean that they're commanding you to do something. If anything, it's just the way they're trying to communicate in English. So I hope that these few pointers do help. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, for that answer. It really helped to set the scene. I just want to now ask you further about what the trends that you can see they're developing, and again expanding on the what our Chinese visitors are looking for when they come to Europe.
So what do Chinese tourists like about Europe? Of course, Chinese tourists like the shopping in Europe, but increasingly they also like the food and drink offer and activities holidays. For the more sophisticated tourists, just being somewhere that can be away from the hustle and bustle of cities that they're used to is also something that they come to Europe for. One thing we do take it for granted living in Europe is the quality of our air. Many Chinese tourists I've met, they do comment on how refreshing just when they breathe in. I think that Europe as a luxury shopping paradise is pretty much established in China. What destination can really start selling are unique experiences. I mean, something that is unique to someone coming from China. It could be food and drink, it could be experience in the nature, or it could be activities like a day in a vineyard, or even a photography course, things like that. With the power of social sharing in China, as long as there are opportunities to take great pictures, it will attract people. I would also say that I wouldn't be too worried about whether Chinese tourists like this type of activities or not like that type of activities. The Chinese population is so big, and the projected number of outbound tourists are at such a level that I believe that no matter how niche your offer is, as long as it is good quality and it provides good experience, it will attract admirers.
Thank you, Ben. That's useful to hear the differences that we have between our two cultures. Now, I really want to find out the points that we need to be concerned about that maybe cut across the cultural differences, and the things that we really must try and avoid when welcoming our Chinese visitors. Are there any taboos that we should consider? Some of us know that ghosts are something that the Chinese particularly are not keen to experience. I wonder whether this is of interest.
Right, so what makes Chinese tourists uncomfortable? Well, that's a really good question. In general, Chinese people don't like confrontation, and sometimes the lack of understanding of what certain action means can create confrontational situations. For example, many people know that Chinese people like to haggle when they shop, and sometimes haggling is just considered as part of the fun of shopping, and other times haggling is actually a buying signal. So sometimes a polite no is all you need, rather than an abrupt confrontation saying, no, this is not how it works in Europe. Another thing that Chinese people don't like is possibly being put on the spot. In general, Chinese people don't like losing face, and sometimes all they need is a little bit of a warm-up before they take part in certain activities. So what should we try to offer best service? Many in the industry already realize the habits of Chinese tourists. For example, they like hot breakfast, whether it's porridge or congee or full English, that sort of thing. But I would also say that if you're organizing a group tour, it's always good to give a clear itinerary with timings rather than giving Chinese tourists many options.
Thank you, Ben. That's good. And then just finally, a lot of people are now, the attractions are now looking to present and organise audio guides. Do you think these are important? We know that a lot of attractions are now having their brochures translated, and I think that the quality of the brochures that I've seen in the last 5 or 6 years has been much improved on what we used to see in the early days. But are there other things that our attractions and hotels should do in anticipation of the visitors that they hope to come to them from China?
If you're relatively new in receiving Chinese tourists, I would suggest you to go to more events from your sector organizations. You'll meet colleagues who has the experience, and people in tourism are generally very friendly, and most are very happy to share experiences. When it comes to having a strategy to target the Chinese market, you must find someone who actually understands Chinese tourists and their changing behavior. China is a fast developing country in many, many ways, and you don't want to be at the back foot of where you want to be in relation to attracting Chinese tourists.
Thank you, Ben. Most interesting and very good start to our webinar. Now I want to move across to Ireland, when we are going to be talking to Katherine OGrady Powers, who runs a sheep farm called Glen Keane Sheep Farm, and she has just taken to the Chinese market hugely and shown us all that things that we actually didn't expect the Chinese to be interested in, they are indeed fascinated. She's also been involved in the EU funding project that we are all part of now, and has really found it most helpful to her and her marketing ideas. So, Katherine, give us your insight, please, into how the Chinese are reacting to your, what I think is a unique product.
Glen Keane Sheep Farm is one of the largest farms in the west of Ireland. It's a hill sheep farm located on the Wild Atlantic Way in County Mayo, just between Louisburgh and Leenane. Due to the demise in sheep farming in our area, we have embraced tourism. We have opened up a brand new visitor centre. In 2014, it opens its doors, and this year we've welcomed almost 30,000 visitors. We do a various number of attractions, all combining traditional working farming methods in the west of Ireland. Our number one attraction is our sheepdog herding event, and that's where the guests can see our border collies rounding up the sheep using verbal and whistle commands. And the fun part about this demonstration is our dogs work for anybody that gives them a clear, concise instruction. So we have started to do immersive demonstrations where we teach the visitor the commands to work the sheepdogs, and it adds a fun element into it. Another demonstration we provide is a traditional turf cutting demo. And again, it's immersive. We teach the visitor all about harvesting the turf on the farm, and they actually participate as well. So it gets them working, it gets them out in the fresh air and really immersed in the west of Ireland and rural living. So we really are a celebration of the Irish story. Glenkeen is designed to welcome everyone from educational tours, leisure tourism, corporate tours, team building and so forth. We're really fortunate that our farm is located in one of the most scenic areas in the country, and we have access to almost 10,000 acres of land, so there's no shortage of space at Glenkeen, and indeed we also customise itineraries for the guests as well.
Thank you, Katherine. Well, I mean, that's quite fascinating to think that you now are being able to have a tourist attraction as well as still have your commercial farm. So, but I'm curious, how on earth did you suddenly think, well, I'm going to attract the Chinese visitors to west of Ireland? What made you think that the Chinese might be interested?
Well, we never really looked at the Chinese market. We were kind of focused on the North American market, the domestic market and the European market. But when I attended the ETOA BIM event in January 2017, I was really delighted to be invited to apply for the World Bridge Tourism Project, which we were accepted on. And this incurred a trip out to Shanghai to promote Glenkeen. And really what we have found, I've never seen such fast results from any other marketing activity that we've undertaken. We have welcomed, since our trip to Shanghai, 150 Chinese visitors. What we have learned that they like to experience is the immersive side of our farm. They want to really participate in the event, be it sheep herding or turf cutting or learning the bowron. And also scone making is becoming quite popular as well with the Chinese visitor. They're very curious. They're curious about our life. They really love to interact and engage. And we've designed an itinerary that not just includes Glenkeen, but also Mayo. We were very fortunate that when we were in Shanghai, it coincided with the return of a lost beach in Mayo that hit the national and the global news network. And this was discussed at the World Bridge Tourism Conference. So that's also part of the curiosity of the visitors from China. They want to see the beach. So it really spreads the tourism event throughout the county. We find that they really want to get in behind the scenes. They want to see how everything is cooked. They want to experience traditional Irish living. They want to learn a few Irish words. They want to learn an Irish dance. And we really have embraced the Chinese visitor in terms of welcome. We've completed the Coatry tourism training program for our staff, which really has given us the skill set to properly provide a good welcome, to make the Chinese guest feel very at home at Len Keane Farm. And this included learning basic welcome terms in Chinese, also facilitating the guests with things like chopsticks. We also provide culinary. We have adapted our lunch menu to include Chinese dishes such as noodles and so forth. So we really want to under-promise but really over-deliver when the Chinese guest arrives at Len Keane.
Katherine, thank you very much indeed. This is really a fascinating story. What I'm interested in also is how have you had to adapt your offering, your attractions, particularly for the Chinese market, and making it so relevant for them, which is clearly a unique experience.
Yes, well, we've made a lot of alterations, and we've actually worked with our local council in providing a Mayo itineraries list, all translated into Mandarin. And this is really to take the work out of the event for designing trips to Mayo for Chinese visitors. We've also created a WeChat account. We're adding Union Pay and Alipay at Len Keane Farm for 2018. So we're really trying to adapt our methods to ensure that we have proper structure in place for the Chinese guest, and making it very simple for them to shop at Len Keane and enjoy a full experience. We've also worked with our partners as well to ensure that they're aware of the different changes that we have made at Len Keane, and ensuring the Chinese visitor receives a true welcome. The coterie training has really provided not just us, but indeed our partners with a good structure to welcome Chinese visitors. And we will also be adding Chinese signage in our premises to ensure that, again, they feel very welcome. We also work with Westport House, Ackle Tourism and Mayo County Council in welcoming the Chinese visitors to Mayo.
Thank you, Katherine. Well, that really was fascinating to me. I can't believe I've been in the business for 20 years and have never heard of such a story. So that really is unique and well done, and really good to see that you've used the EU-funded project to establish yourself. And we wish you well for 2018. And now I want to move us on to talking about social media, which, as we all know, is a huge issue in China. WeChat is so important to the Chinese market. I'd like to introduce to you Bart Horsten of Horsten International, based in Belgium. And it's an area that he's really specialised on, and is taking the social media into Europe and integrating the Chinese requirements into our European attractions, and helping us all understand the need for effective social media. So over to you, Bart.
Yes, so we had a customer is a flower show, so it's just an annual flower show once every year, 1 month every year. So it's quite a challenge, because on one side there's only things happening once a year. On the other side, of course, it's a very nice challenge to create the buzz and increase the tension while the flower show is coming. So we were engaging with other platforms, could be tourist boards or other organizations. Also, it's a Belgian show, it's close to Brussels. So we've been working with even partners in Holland. And when the flower show was coming up, we were arranging a giveaway campaign. So customers or followers could answer very simple questions, and we even used some video material. And then we would give away 10 tickets, free tickets. And in this, we saw that although, of course, it took a while to create a number of followers and really get the engagement from customers, the more the flower show was coming up, we reached more and more followers and more audience, and in this way we created really a buzz, and which actually then was quite successful. Of course, the big challenge is then after the show is over, how do you keep those followers? So that's a never-ending challenge we have to face. But we try to combine different channels. So the flower show has a WeChat account, but we also set up a Weibo account. And as I explained, due to the interaction between the different platforms, it's really a multi-channel approach, because on one side we work with limited budgets, because it's just a flower show. We don't have big budgets, so we were quite creative. We had to be creative. And in this way, by using all these different channels, different platforms, travel platforms, in China there's very specific platforms which a lot of Chinese tourists, they want to experience. If other tourists have been there, they also want to go. So in this way we were able to create this attention, and the giveaway action was really quite successful. And in the end, well, although we only started working with this flower show 2 years ago, we did manage to increase the number of Chinese visitors with, I think, about 10 to 15% year on year. So that's how I think we could create a quite interesting social campaign.
But that's really interesting, and then 10 to 15% increase. That obviously is really impressive. So that is really great. What do you think was the key to the success? What's driving your progress in social media?
This was really important in this particular case, but also in other cases. It was very important to really understand what is the consumer or the tourist looking for, right? Because Chinese tourists are looking for a quite different experience than most Western tourists are. So a few months in advance, we planned the action. What is really our target customer or target audience? How do we approach them? Which channels we use? And then once we made the decision, we prepared this content calendar through different channels. And then during the show itself, we also try to make our visitors to scan the QR code and read information in Chinese, and in this way keep on following us, because once they scan the QR code, they would also follow us, and then of course try to keep them following us, and then coming up to the next year, try to convince them to come again or bring others, and then by sharing their experiences with others, and then we were analyzing afterwards what did we do wrong, and we found out that certain activities which we expected would be quite successful actually didn't really work that well. So it was really a learning experience for all of us, which we hopefully can do again or do better for next year. And in this way, it's really a joint collaboration, as I said, with a limited budget, because of course you can spend thousands and thousands of euros to engage with key opinion leaders or influencers. They charge a lot of money, but actually we managed to do a lot of what we did free of charge, just by being creative and talking to other platforms who are also quite interested to launch this idea or launch this giveaway action, because it was also creating more buzz for their own WeChat and Weibo accounts. And in this way, it was really a very nice example of combining different channels and then planning well. Also during the event, following up what's happening, learning from it, and then analyzing and do it better next time.
Thank you, Bart. That was really interesting to hear about the Belgian Flower Show and how you are using that as a medium, if you like, and a focus for the social media. What do you think that we should all be concentrating on now to really develop and capitalize on the interest in China on social media?
Well, if I talk about social media campaign, of course, it's an online campaign, but I think not to be forgotten is also the offline activity. So we are, you could say, a consulting marketing company based in Belgium on one side, but also with a China office. And the interesting thing about it is that since we have also the China office, we can also talk to tour operators in China, because it's not only about social and online. It's also important that the tour operators and any operators in the tourist industry in China also know who you are, know that you exist, so that they include a visit to your show or to your restaurant or to you, whatever operator you are, into their programs or their packages. And in this way, by making yourself visible offline or in the traditional way, but also online, you can engage more with those operators, which will help you to also become more visible in China. And with my company and my office in China, because as you may know, to open a WeChat account, a verified WeChat account, you need a legal entity in China. Of course, there's marketing agencies and other organizations who can provide those kind of service. But since we have a business license in China with our own company, in fact, we can also provide this service to our customer, because of course, most of my customers are small and medium-sized companies. They do not have the intention to set up a company in China. They do not have any staff in China. So what we offer them is, apart from our business license, which can be used to set up the WeChat account, we can also provide them with content management in Chinese. And as I said, contacts with tour operators and other operators in the tourist industry in China, engage with tourism boards and other organizations, both in Europe as well as in China. And in this way, create this online and offline activity. And I think that's the key recommendation I would give. Not focus only on online, do not focus only on offline, but try to find a creative way to combine both in a way that, for example, if you are a hotel, it's important that also your staff knows very well how to engage or how to work with Chinese tourists, because it's really a different approach. It can be as simple as offering hot boiling water in the rooms, a specific breakfast menu which is more fit to the Chinese visitor, or any other thing which can make the life and visit of the Chinese tourists more comfortable. And so we give trainings about cultural differences dealing with Chinese to our customers. So that's, I think, what I want to explain is it's not only about social and online, because that's only a small part of the attraction and the engagement with your Chinese consumer, but also good service, good connection with tour operators and anything related to that.
Thank you, Bart. That's really interesting and has really given us a whole view of social media and how we need to adjust our offerings, if you like, for the Chinese market. Now I want to move us on to our final contributor, which is Jacobo of ARM23. He's really taking us well into the future with his thoughts about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and taking technology well into the future.
With no doubt, the main technological innovation that could enrich European tourism in the last 12 months at least, and make it even more attractive, are image recognition, augmented reality, and mixed reality. These technologies are extremely connected to each other, and their potential is endless if they are combined with an innovative vision of the tourism industry. Think just a second on how helpful could be for a visitor who has never been in Italy, for example, having a smartphone or other device that is not only a guide, it's a companion, a 360-degree travel assistant, but it can become the access key, the passepartout, for a unique, enhanced, emotional and conscious, authentic experience.
Thank you very much indeed for that introduction, Jacopo. Where do you feel that the Chinese are? As you know, we'll be welcoming Chinese visitors into Europe. Is their knowledge on technology, is it in front of what we are knowing here in Europe? And how are they using the very latest technology when they come to Europe?
Well, certainly, from this point of view, China is very much ahead. Over the last few years, these technologies have spread very quickly, so much that they are revolutionizing the way in which the daily activities of millions of Chinese citizens are taking place. Just think about facial recognition, which is so accurate today that it can be used in financial transactions, for instance, security, or just to do shopping. This also depends on the high standard of security and convenience they offer. Incorporate and integrate technologies such as image recognition, augmented reality, and mixed reality in art cities or tourist destinations could surely help to attract new Chinese visitors or bring back old Chinese visitors, because the aim is creating the community. We want them back. A city which understands and anticipates their needs. It's a city which is one step ahead, that wants to give more than what it is expected, and is therefore ready to show its artistic and cultural heritage in the best of ways, giving the tourist the memory of an authentic and full experience that goes beyond the simple standardized visit.
Okay, Jacopo, that really was useful and sets the scene very nicely. But as you of course know, on this webinar, it is about the travel and tourism industry, and particularly how we can make sure that we are offering the Chinese visitors everything that they need, and keeping up to date with the technology is so important in our sector. So how can we specifically work with artificial intelligence and the new technology to make sure that we have the welcome correctly placed for the Chinese visitors?
Well, in this regard, I would like to talk about our smart city platform. Our smart city platform consists of a back-end interface and another front-end interface. The back-end interface, it's the way who is managing the travel to monitor and to better improve the quality of the travel of its tourists. On the other hand, you have the front end, which is the portable device, a smartphone or a tablet. The latter is a mobile application for visitors that allows the user, once the city is selected, to decide which range of services and point of interest according to their needs they will have to select. The app is a travel assistant that provides information on whatever: public transportation, ATMs, hospitals, supermarkets, museums, theaters, art galleries, restaurants, hotel, and so on. In addition, thanks to the Around You feature, the user can find along the way all the points of interest in his vicinity and know them better thanks to the information in augmented reality. The app gives the visitor, in a very friendly way, all that can be useful for him, and does it in a complete and innovative way. For example, a tourist in front of a monument can simply scan through the smartphone camera, and once the monument is recognized by it, he can get, in augmented reality, precious multimedia content and interesting curiosities, and everything in Chinese, their language. We also provide the sign language. Such a tool, as well as helping travelers, can add a lot of value to their experience. This is what gives me more satisfaction, I must say. And that pushes me and ARM23 to work hard day after day.
Splendid, Giacomo. That really gives us a huge, slightly daunting feel of what may be around the corner in technology. But of course, many people in the tourism industry are SMEs, and if we had a number one project or initiative that you feel we should follow, what would you suggest is the right one for us to invest our money in new technology the coming years?
Well, I will say for sure augmented reality. This technology is constantly evolving. So many world giants invest their resources because they believe in its endless potential. The industries that use it grow more and more every day because it is able to enrich reality with a range of additional information that overlaps what your eyes see. People can rely on more data that they can use to carry out their ordinary daily activities, or even extraordinary activities. Just think about how it can revolutionize the life of a surgeon, a fireman, a driver, or not a cook. Surely, it will also revolutionize the tourism industry by offering visitors richer, more comfortable, and complete experiences.
Thank you, Giacomo. That was really interesting and gives us a real insight as to what we may expect in the future using technology in travel and tourism. Well, that concludes all our contributions from the practitioners today. But now we come to the questions session. We already have a good number of questions that have been submitted, but I'd like you, please, if you are happy to send in your questions using the function on the screen, and I'll do my best over the next few minutes to answer as many as I can. So thank you once again for... Okay, now is the time we'll move on to the questions and answers. I've already had 50 questions submitted, so I'll go through those. But first of all, I want to just put a poll up on the screen for you because we just want to get a feel of how many of you are well into the Chinese market already. So if you can respond to that, that would be helpful. I must now remind you all that this webinar is part of the European Commission's partnership in the European Tourism Programme. This, as I think most of you will know, is to be delivered by ETOA, ETC, and ECTA with the support of Welcome Chinese. Now, during 2018, so just a few weeks' time, the EU China Tourism Year commences, and during this year you'll have many opportunities to partake in a range of opportunities to learn more about the Chinese market and how it's been developed with the help of the European Commission partnership during 2018 and of course future. There's a log on for you which I'll give right at the end, but I'll give it to you now. Euro or EU Travel Partnership.org. We'll put that up on the screen so you can see that, but that's the way to log on to make sure that you keep up to date with all the program for the EU-China Tourism Year. Right, now I have some questions, so I'll go straight on to these. What I've done is to link the questions together. 50 of them, there's no time to go through them all, but there's some common themes that are coming through these. So I have them before me, and I'll just try and lump them together for you. A lot of people are anxious about the language barrier. Obviously, language is so important in travel and tourism. But now, for the Chinese, we are noticing in the last 5 or 6 years that many of the Chinese that are coming to Europe do have English and also French and German, the main European languages, because they have studied over in Europe and they are able to use this language when they come out to travel, maybe as a tourism. So although it's still very, very important and particularly essential for group travel, so those of you that are in the ADS market, then you must offer either an audio or a guide, because most of the travellers in the ADS market will be needing some help with your local language. So that's really quite important. However, the other thing that we must remember is that over the last 10, 15 years, there's been a huge number of Chinese that have come over to Europe to study. And therefore they're learning the European languages, they've taken a range of degrees. So it's important that, again, that you respect their language and don't obviously talk down to them, but understand that they will want to use their language, German, French, Spanish, English, when they come traveling. So be ready for that. These will be in the younger generation, maybe 25, 28 through to 40-ish as a guide. In my experience of 20 years in the market, the senior people, that's maybe 50 and over, they will have language skills, but they'll be reluctant to use them because of this issue that I'm sure many of you heard about, the point about face. They won't want to be seen to be struggling with your European language. So be aware of that, and that really is quite important. Let me just look at other things. Oh yes, there's been a range of questions about budget. The Chinese are keen to get value for money. There's no doubt about that. And quite a few of the questions, mostly from the more experienced tour operators and attractions in France and Germany, were clearly having difficulty with the Chinese wanting to bid down the price of their tour or entrance into an attraction or even a hotel bill. Now, in my experience, you've just got to be firm on your pricing. If you want to come down, or if you've got scope to come down, then do come down in price, but be firm. I always tell my staff that one of the very best words that Chinese will understand in any language is no. And if you need to, then just hold your line and say, no, I'm sorry, that is the price. Otherwise, the Chinese will bid you down if you allow them to. But they're quite happy if you say, no, that's the price, well, then they'll say, fine. They're not going to argue further. The other point that we need to think about is the scale of their travel. Again, over 20 years, most of the travel in the early 15, 20 years ago was through the ADS, through the groups. Still have groups, big groups across Europe and here in the UK. But they are becoming less, lower as a percentage of the whole. That means, of course, that the increase is quite often in FIT, in MICE market. MICE is becoming a market which I'll cover later, but it's something that we need to be aware of, and it's very, very interesting how in the last 2 or 3 years that has developed. So I'll come back to the MICE market later. There's a lot of you that have been asking about small deluxe type hotels. There is a market for this, for certain, but many of the groups that are coming over are large groups. So you need to specialize and look at what we're terming now family groups. Now, family groups tend to obviously be of a relative or a whole group of family. But you'll see that there's the man and wife, quite often, their parents, and the one child. So you've got a group of 7. Again, quite often, either of the parents, the husband or the wife, will have travelled to Europe as a business traveller, maybe, or been part of a larger delegation, and now they want to come as a tourist. This is a really interesting and growing market, and one that you can attract and be of interest via social media. Again, there's some questions later that I want to mention about social media, because that again in the last 2 or 3 years has really taken off, and we must all be very aware of how the Chinese are interacting with us in Europe via the social media. Okay, I think I'm just looking at that poll, which is excellent. We have some good responses to that, and thank you for that. I think maybe we can do the next poll now and just gather that in. So the first one's finished, and there's another one just coming up now for you to have a look at, and it would be very, very helpful for us if you could respond to that one. We've still got plenty of time to go through, and if you have any questions that you want to type in whilst I'm talking, I'm looking at the screen at the same time. Hopefully I can pick some of them up and answer them as we're going through. Okay, now I want to go on to some general questions about what type of tour we should offer the Chinese when they're coming over. There's a group of people from Portugal, and I'm grouping some of the questions together. And I think maybe the Portuguese market is relatively new, and there's some, I think, just not sure of what to offer. Well, it's a general across the whole of Europe. Whatever is your speciality, don't try to be something that you're not. Don't try to be a country of history going back centuries upon centuries. If yours is much more of modern history, or if yours is of interest to maybe nature lovers rather than city dwellers. So whatever you've got, whatever your areas of strength are, then just play to those. So Portugal in particular, I just want to spend a little bit of time on Portugal. That here there's obviously beaches down the south. The Chinese in the last 10 years have taken, to my surprise really, quite a lot of interest in beach holidays. I used to say 10 years or so ago, don't worry about beach holidays for the Chinese because they don't relax. Well, it's totally changed. And now you look on their highest, where they visit, the Chinese visiting, Thailand, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, are very, very high. And most of these tourists are going for the beach holiday. So Portugal for certain, that's an area that I think you can easily concentrate on. You need to make it fairly all-inclusive and just attractive for a bleak 5-star market. Most of the European travellers that are travelling for the sun won't be looking for a 2- or 3-star accommodation. They will be looking for premier and all-inclusive type resorts. The other thing again, in the last 3 or 4 years, we've noticed more and more Chinese are interested in hiring cars. Again, this is something 15 years ago we would have never heard of, but it's becoming more common for FIT groups, particularly these family groups that I was mentioning, for the parents to be hiring a car. Of course, they're driving in China, and if you've ever been to China, I've always said that the Chinese must be brilliant drivers, because how they don't have so many accidents in I cannot imagine. Their driving technique is strange, and certainly very strange for us in Europe. So car hire is an area and is something that I think you need to think about, and I think would work particularly if you're working into the FIT medium to top end. And I've also had some queries, questions in from Latvia and Lithuania. Now, and they are talking about business travel and how to attract, I think maybe they're looking at inward investment here, because the Chinese are very active, as we all know, in investing into Europe. It is the key issue, and we have found in France, Germany, UK, many of the investors that are now investing and seriously investing came across as part of a business delegation maybe 10, 12 years ago. It will take time. None of the tourism attractions, none of the tourism visitors come overnight. You need to have a plan. You need to, as we all say, plan for the long term. So I think that in new countries like the Baltic states, I think an area for you particularly to look for is to try and attract inward investors, try to attract business travelers, and then as they come across, then they will be more interested in returning to your country as tourists in the future. Another question has come in from the Netherlands. They were particularly interested in trying to attract the student population that's here in Europe. Now again, I'm sure most European countries, there are Chinese students that are undertaking often master's degrees at all your universities. These are, generally speaking, from relatively wealthy families and are over in your country for maybe 18 months, 2 years, doing a master's degree. In our experience here in the UK, they are very keen on exploring Europe whilst they are studying. Everywhere, of course, we know that students have fairly lengthy holidays, vacations, and if you can attract these students, so we're talking about the Netherlands and in Holland, if you are able to link in with, say, a French university, German university, London English universities, and see whether you can attract those visitors. They're already here. They're not flying 5,500 miles to come. They're in Europe. The huge advantage that you have with students, the master's graduates, they'll be in their early to mid-20s. Generally speaking, they come from wealthy families, as I say, and their parents will be very keen to visit them whilst they are in Europe. So if you can attract those students, there's a fair chance you'll also attract the VFRs with them. So I'll just talk a little bit to one side there on the VFRs and the mixture, if you like, from the master's graduates. So this is a family group, but you've got the daughter or the son effectively showing the parents around your country, if it's a French university, or taking them to Germany or neighbouring countries. So again, you've got to be careful how to not talk down to the parents. You must acknowledge that this family group, which will possibly be 3 people, mother and father and the child, they will, generally speaking, be fairly wealthy. The parents may not speak your language, but without a doubt, their child, their daughter or son will. So be aware of that. Have maybe an audio for the parents, which you could offer if they wanted it, they could take it. Again, save them the face. Don't expect them to speak German or French or Spanish when they come over. That's becoming a key issue. I'm just looking down on the questions that are coming in. You're firing questions now, thick and fast. There's a question here that's just come in from Barcelona. I mean, we in Europe are having big concerns over security. In China, they are anxious, they are aware of the security issues that we have. China is, touch wood, he says, saying this, at the moment, a very safe and secure country. But they are aware, the Chinese are aware. I think they are quite accepting that it isn't possible to safeguard everybody all the time. So just sensible safeguards and try and reassure everybody that follow the guide, follow the instructions, don't go to places where really, I mean, there's places in China that I wouldn't go. I've been to China for many, many years. Still I wouldn't go to, and the same in all the countries. So I wouldn't worry too much about the terrorism issue, although we are seeing, and we have seen in France, Belgium, London, a drop-off of Chinese immediately after, maybe for 6 weeks or so, but quite quickly figures are being restored. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. There is something, just talking about Barcelona, that we spoke of the recent conference for ETOA. We were talking about over-tourism. That again is something that is a concern to many countries, and Barcelona is of course one of the areas that are concerned about over-tourism. And China are also very, very aware of this. In fact, President Xi, in his recent 3.5-hour address to the nation, if you like, at their recent Congress, part of that was about the Chinese being good ambassadors when they go overseas. So there's clear instructions from the Chinese government for the Chinese, when they are tourists, and of course on business, to behave properly. So they should be biddable. The Chinese, you should find, if you ask them not to smoke, you ask them not to do this or to queue over there, you should find nowadays that they are biddable. 20 years ago, it was certainly different. I keep on saying 20 years ago, but honestly, the market is changing. It's changing now, and I think we'll see, maybe in the next 5 years, huge changes in the type of tourism that we are seeing from China into Europe. Right, let's just see. Oh yes, one or two. Where was this from? I think this was from Turkey. The question, we're talking about wine and whether the Chinese are acquiring the taste for wine. There is no doubt that the Chinese are acquiring the taste of wine. Many of you have heard the stories about 15 years ago that the Chinese, and to be honest, I think it was also true of the Russians, were very adept at mixing red wine with Coca-Cola because it made it taste a little better. Well, honestly, that type of anecdote is no longer true of the Chinese, and I'm sure of the Russians as well. They do very much enjoy good wine. And whilst I was looking at these questions, I did some research over the weekend, and somebody is telling us, I'm not too sure whether this is true, but in 5 years' time, this article was saying that will be more Chinese-owned vineyards across the world than any other countries, nations owning vineyards. So I think what we're seeing here is that the Chinese realize that yes, they can make wine, but it is so much better to buy a quality chateau in France, good producer in California, or of course any of the producers in Australia. So I think what we're seeing is that the Chinese, as they've done with many other industries, are acquiring these vineyards, and therefore, of course, they will be able to import this quality wine into China, and when they come across to Europe and across the world, they will be much more knowledgeable about wine. So wine is an area that I think you can start thinking about having tours, vineyard tours across Europe. We have so many excellent opportunities to sample the wines. I was going to, we've got 10 minutes or so, so I just wanted to mention about mice. The mice market is an area that I suppose up until the last 10 years has totally been dominated by the Chinese, either internally within China or around Asia. And these are groups that would travel many hundred. In fact, I think there was a group recently went into France, which was 5,000 that went into France as a group. Now that is very unusual for us in Europe to have these type of numbers for a mice group. However, we are seeing that there are more inquiries. My company is having more inquiries now for mice groups from China, and they are, a small group is 300 or 400, and a large group is 3,000 or 4,000. This is going to give us huge problems across Europe because we just do not have, in many countries, certainly in many cities, the type of bed bank, the beds, hotel beds that can cope with that type of number, obviously in high season. If we can encourage them to come low season, then that would be magnificent, would help our hotels well, would help everybody, and would mean that we could extend our season. However, the Chinese tend to travel in their mice groups from May to September. So it is a matter of trying to encourage these inquiries to come. And one way of doing that, of course, is to encourage them to come on price. So if you can make it attractive for them to come in shoulder season, then I think you'll find that's a very good market, and one that will become very lucrative. I need a drink. That brings me now on to another question I've had from Ireland, actually. We were talking, they were asking about the direct flights and whether there is any hope, and I just mentioned, they mentioned obviously Ireland, because quite a lot of Chinese go to Ireland, but they come via Europe. There are no direct flights into Dublin at the moment. In my research, there are many countries that are trying to attract direct flights in from China at the moment. Certainly Dublin, certainly Edinburgh, and I think there's a range of other countries. Now this is outside any of the influence that any of us doing this webinar today can possibly attract, but have any influence over. But it is something that if you can encourage your government and obviously the local airport to open communications with a Chinese airport, with a Chinese airline, then that will make a huge difference to your numbers. And we here in the UK have recently had an example. There's a direct flight that has come into Manchester for the last 12-18 months, and this has had a huge impact on the northwest of England as to the number of Chinese visitors coming in. Obviously it would do, but it is the key if you want to develop, if a country or a region wants to develop their inbound tourism from China, then a direct flight is really essential. However, of course, if you can work on the, as I said earlier, the students that are already here in Europe, then this will help and will give you sort of a way of learning about the Chinese culture and learning about how they like to be, how they like to travel. So gently, slowly into the market. Oh, yes, the other thing that was talking about European, there are 2 or 3 good Chinese newspapers that are published in Europe. So these are Chinese papers that are published, obviously, in Chinese language, and circulated on a controlled circulation basis within Europe. A lot of them through their Chinese cash and carry or the Chinese restaurants, but they do get out into the Chinese population. And it may well be a good way of, a low-cost way of advertising and promoting your area if you can maybe get a advertorial or even take an advert just to see whether or not you can attract some Chinese that are in Europe. That's an area. Somebody else was talking about Cantonese in their question. Be careful about that, because Cantonese, of course, is the Hong Kong language, and although Cantonese is spoken down the south, so that's in the Guangzhou area, Mandarin is the language that you need, and even if you're getting any audios translated or audios produced, then again, be careful of the dialect. Some Chinese can be quite difficult or a little bit not very pleasant if they hear a dialect which they find unacceptable. And by this, we may well mean a more country dialect rather than, say, a dialect which comes from a tier 1 or tier 2 city. So again, be aware of that, be aware of who is doing your audio for you. We've just got 3 more minutes or so, so just to wind up, there's again some questions here. There's a question here talking about the luxury market. Now, we in Europe use the term luxury quite glibly, but it is a term that is not particularly widely used in China. It's got connotations for the regime, the Chinese regime, which is not what they want to encourage. So be careful if you use the word luxury. High quality is acceptable, but luxury sometimes is badly translated and gives the impression of a very elite tour. And if you're trying to attract business travelers, then that may not be the message that they want to hear. So just luxury is a word that is be careful how you're using that. Business travelers, again, I come back to that, big way in a lot of countries, the newer countries that are new. Georgia, sorry, there's a lot of interest from Georgia. That I'm really convinced that the best way in for the newer countries that are looking to attract Chinese into Europe, try to attract the business traveller and the diplomats first, followed by the student, and then once you've got the direct routes coming in from China, then you can look at the wider tourism market. Thanking you all for your attention. I really hope that you found this interesting and informative.